Thank you to EA Game Changers for flying me out to try the new Season 3 Apex Legends map. I'm going to show you all of the new named locations on the map and give you an overview of these areas, explain some of the developer insights that were given to me and why this map has been designed this way, and also show you some secret areas that aren't on the map. There are some really interesting secrets in this map and I'm really excited to show you. First things first, you'll notice how beautiful this map is. It really is a work of art. Everywhere you look is just throwing so many different colors in your face, and from a game design perspective there's so much going on in this map too, and I'll explain all of that as we go along. Before we jump into the full-on details, I'll put a list on screen with all of the locations I'll be covering. So here they are, all 15 named locations, the train, and we'll also cover some secret areas too. And by secret I really mean secret. These places are kind of hidden. I mean, after a few hours of gameplay you'll probably find them yourself, but I thought I'd put them in here so you can check them out on day one. Up first we have the epicenter. Now this is kind of this big crater inwards, and right at the center we have this big machinery. I don't really know what it is. Because of the way the ice is, it means that you're never really out in the open too much. You can always go in and out of the ice structures. One of the big things I had with the new map changes in Season 2 was there was a lot of low ground, so people from above could shoot down at you, but in this area, even though there's kind of a crater, you're protected by the ice. There's some multiple layers to this as well, we'll show you as we play. This place isn't the best for loot, honestly, but it's one of many interesting engagement points that you'll probably come across later in the game. I had a lot of fights here and it was really fun. Because of the way the terrain is balanced, sometimes you do feel like if you have the low ground, it's kind of hard to battle up ground, so keep that in mind. It's honestly not the best to get stuck in here when people are fighting and it's a late game ring. You want to be on the top, really. You can get up to a higher level on this big reactor thing, and on there is some loot. I was lucky I found some purple armor this time. I don't know if this is one of those point of interest spawns where purple armor spawns a lot, but it might be. And at this point you can really see how much of a crater this is. You get a good vantage point from here, but actually because of the way the terrain slopes in, there's not much you can really see. In this gameplay I ended up going on to see the next spot. I'll show you that later. At the very top there are a few buildings. You'll see a lot of these buildings, they are kind of cut and pasted across the map. It's a bit of area to get a bit of loot. So up next we have the train. The train is a very core part of this new map, and it's a strange thing to think about really, but it works really well. So you can get on the train. It goes around the entire map pretty much, which allows you to transport quickly. There are multiple levels. I mean, you can stand on the roof, but the loot is on the lower level. Now, if you want to, you can choose to move the train yourself. You can go to the very front and there's a button that stops and starts the train. However, if you want to run on the train, it doesn't really move that fast, so you shouldn't have much difficulty getting on it. Obviously, it does pick up a bit of speed once you get going. As you can see, this map just looks absolutely stunning. There are a lot of environmental areas like this with a lot of open terrain, which is a bit new to Apex, but the open terrain is always complemented by a lot of terrain, a lot of rocks, small buildings, objects, so you can go from cover to cover. It's well thought out. There's a lot of tunnels too. You can find loot in these tunnels, but honestly, I'm not really sure what their purpose serves other than just kind of like a shielded area to hide in whilst you are on the train. And this is another area. This is an unnamed location, but as you can see, it is a beautiful little area with some buildings. You also kind of get to see the crypto drone in use here. It is a really useful ability. Once again, here's another area. There's a lot of low ground, high ground in this map, but they've really thought it out and made sure there's zip lines and ways to quickly get in and out of the different areas. So as you can see here, this is one of the zip lines you can get to. Also, another thing to note about the train is that it always has a beam of light above it, just like the hot drops and the airdrops, which means you're never going to have a difficulty spotting it. You know, if it's coming along, you're going to notice it. And it also appears on the map and you can see the train moving. So if you want to kind of check to see where the train is, whether anybody's on the train, you can check. I mean, at the end of the day, it's probably going to be moving if there's a player on it. Up next, we have Thermal Station. Now, this kind of has a similar design as the epicenter. There's a overlooking area which has the high ground, and then as you get into the center of Thermal Station, it's lower down. Now, the developers said that they would like to force more long-ranged fights. So, the way they've done this with this area in particular is having these cable cars in the middle that separate the high ground and the low ground. You can, if you want to, just jump into the lava, but you're going to take damage. It's probably not something you want to do. So, you're kind of forced to take some fights long range first and then get closer once you've done damage by going down the zip lines which are attached to the cable cars. Whether or not you like this or not, it's happening. The developers want to have a more long range meta in Season 3. They want to have a larger map. By the way, this map is larger than Kings Canyon. That's something I should talk about. We're not really sure about how much larger. They did say that whilst it's not massively larger, there is still some more playing area in this map. Now, in terms of players, there's still 60 players, which means the fights may be less common. So anyway, we have buildings around the top edge, and then in the center you have this area with a few loot bins. Once again, the loot here isn't too great. There's something I noticed about this map was the loot kind of felt a little sparse, and I kind of gave my thoughts and feedback, and hopefully they will increase it in some of these areas. There are some points on the map which have insane loot density, and I'll be showing you those at some point. So if you want to check out which areas have the best loot, definitely keep watching. I'll explain that later. Next, we have Capital City. This is a beautiful area on the map. There are some kind of spread apart skyscrapers. Once again, this kind of long-ranged theme is very clear. You can enter all of these buildings. Some of them have about 4 or 5 levels and lead up to the roof. Some of them have about 2 levels and you cannot go any higher. You can kind of see here different levels of the buildings. There are some open areas in between the buildings as well, but for the most part, all of the good loot is inside these skyscrapers. We also have a little underpass tunnel thing that actually cuts through the tunnel, which is really awesome. As you can see here, we make our way through this building, and you'll notice in some of the taller buildings, which I'll show you in a minute, that they have zip lines that kind of show their way right to the top, like here for example. So you don't have to go all the way up the stairs. You're not going to be forced to take these choke points on the stairs. Players are going to have to divide their attention. You can get off each floor as well through the zip lines. So players are going to have a really hard time kind of camping here, which is good. I'm glad. I don't want people just holding buildings like that. And then we have this big sky tower in the middle. This is kind of the sky elevator that everyone's talking about, and you can enter it. There is a lower level right on the ground floor with loot, and then kind of a first floor level with loot as well. And then you have the top, which is this massive area which gives you a huge vantage point of the whole city. You're going to have some awesome fights here. I've already had quite a few fights here. It's one of my favorite areas in the map, honestly. It's a really good area to kind of engage from. With all of the open area in this map, and there is quite a bit more than Kings Canyon, you still have cover that you can go from, so you can have no problem getting in between these areas. We also have the train track which goes through, and a small train station here, as you can see. Ultimately, if you land here, this is going to be one of the spots where there's a lot of loot, but there's going to be a lot of teams here. What I like about this area as well is the detail of all of the buildings. Like, it's not just copy-pasted buildings. Each building has a lot of detail. For example, we've got this design here, which is completely unique to this building itself. A lot more detail has gone into this map than Kings Canyon. There's so much variety in the styles of buildings, the biomes. It's beautiful. We actually get into a fight here, and you can see how important the center area is. Holding the center ground is going to win you fights here. It really, really is. I mean, you can of course fight at long range, and that's where the long range sightline comes in here. Like, you're not going to want to push this unless you get a knock or your team is ready and waiting. A nice design choice is that you can always just jump down to the lower floors. It's well protected. There's a lot of escape routes. Like I say, this is one of my favorite places. I'm really going to enjoy engaging here. Up next, we have Refinery, and this place may not look that exciting. There's kind of just a few industrial buildings, but what I found is this place actually has some of the best loot in the game, at least in terms of loot density. I found so much loot here, it was insane. It's right next to the epicenter, which I showed you earlier, that big ice area. Basically, there's one big central point. It's the big warehouse, there's multiple levels, tons of loot, but then on the outskirts we have a number of different buildings too, and you can also get inside those nuclear reactors. I'll show you in a minute. Here we can kind of see an overview of the area. As you can see, it's pretty large. Even though we have this main building in the center, there's a lot of buildings on the outskirts. Like I said, one of the best loot densities in the new map. From here we can kind of get a look at just how beautiful this map is. The contrast between the ice and the fire just works so well. From an art perspective, this map is beautiful. I mean, never mind that toilet. Besides that, this map is just stunning. It really, really is. I like these new building designs as well. There's multiple entrances on all buildings, so I feel like camping is going to be a little more challenging in Season 3. I know that it's still going to be a thing, especially in Ranked, but it's going to be more challenging for sure. And then before we move on to the next place, as you can see, you can zip line onto these towers and then you kind of fall into the middle. And these are other areas that have quite a lot of loot in too, which is awesome. Next, we have the geyser. This is a small place. I only went here once, but I feel like this is going to be the kind of location where not many players go. It's going to kind of be the new swamps. You're going to have people there that go for the loot, but honestly, the loot density isn't amazing. I will say that I did enjoy the engagements I had here. The location is pretty chilled, but if you're the kind of player that wants to go on the outskirts of the map and then slowly make their way in, this is going to be the place for you. And it has that kind of hot springs vibe. Like, this is the kind of area you'd find near somewhere with a lot of volcanic activity, but it's a complete contrast once again to the volcanic lava areas and the ice areas. I cannot stress how beautiful this map is. I also want to point out these buildings, which are kind of scattered throughout the map. They're really well designed. There's multiple entrances. They are very open. There's long tunnels, so it's easy to kind of engage players in them, but you can hold them down if you're well organized. Up next, we have the dome. This takes up quite a large portion of the map. The dome itself is quite small, but there's a lot of surrounding areas. We have this kind of design where we have a symmetrical setup with these buildings. So you'll see the players that are landing and you'll all choose different locations, different sides of the area to land on. You'll be able to loot up and then kind of have your space before you decide to fight each other. There's definitely enough loot here to set yourself up before engaging. This kind of area for some reason reminds me of the pit. I feel like it's what the pit would do if it was upgraded and majorly developed. It has that same vibe where you're in this kind of arena. In a way, I feel like I'm going to enjoy the engagements here. But once again, you have these kind of walkways that are spread out to kind of create more long-range engagements. I love these buildings. I love the way you can slide in and out of them like that. The loot here is pretty decent, but if there's like 4 or 5 teams, then you're really going to struggle. So at that point, you probably want to make your way to the next area as quick as possible. Here we can see the other areas in the dome, or at least kind of outside of the dome. There's some surrounding areas with more loot, this barren land. It's a bit empty, honestly, so when you're leaving this area, you kind of want to be either the first one to leave or the winning team to leave. Otherwise, you're going to be in a bit of a troubling situation if you have no gear. Next up, we have sorting facility, and this is just on the other side of the dome. Sorry, sorting factory. Now, there's a lot of warehouse style buildings, a lot of loot in this area, and it's quite open. There's a lot of space to go through. I personally noticed those loot ball drones that we saw in the trailer. You can shoot those down and get loot from them. There are a lot in this area. I don't know why, if I was just lucky or what. You have multiple levels to this building, this kind of interior area here, very small level before you get to the very top. It's a really interesting design. I'm sure people are going to camp down this building in the late games. Ultimately, just like everywhere on this map, you are just surrounded by beautiful scenery, and you have the train track which goes right the way through it as well. Like pretty much everywhere in this map, the train just goes all the way through. And then you can make your way down here, another small area. Like, you don't really want to be caught in here, but there is some loot down here if you need it. And then this leads into a small unnamed location on the other side of the cliff. What I like about this map is that no matter where you're going, you're going to find small locations here and there. But I still do think the loot density needs to be improved a little bit on some areas. Up next, we have Fuel Depot. And this place is pretty small, pretty insignificant. However, I think it's going to be somewhere you're going to remember. And that's because it is an absolute bottleneck. And you're going to die here a lot. This is kind of the place you just don't want to be in. You have choke points on either side of Fuel Depot. You have to go through these rocks on either side, and I've died here so many times already. There isn't much significant about this place. You kind of have a few buildings and then this big fuel tower up here. As you can see, we get into a bit of engagement here, and we end up losing the fight because, well, you guess it, classic third parties. So yeah, all I'd say about this place is avoid it, especially if you're trying to get into the ring. But besides that, you do get kind of a nice overlook of the next place we'll look at in a second. Up next we have Capital City. This is one of 3 big cities on the new map. I wanted to show you a few of the loot areas around the outskirts first. There's a lot of these, so if you ever need loot, you can stop here first. As always, the train goes through this major location. There are a lot of buildings in this area, but it's not as spread out as Skyhook. Is a bit more condensed, although there's the potential for some long range fights too. The same story can be said for the buildings. Most skyscrapers allow you to go to the 2nd or 3rd floor, although there are a couple that let you go right to the top. We also have this unique building, the car parking lot. There are 2 of them. This isn't in any of the other cities. And then we have this big train depot as well. Overall, it's a nice little engagement area, tons of loot here, and I'm sure this is going to be a hot zone for a lot of players who want to get kills early on too. After that, we have the tree. This is literally just a giant leaf tree. Code Leaf, anybody? This is where it originated from, apparently. There's some loot in the center, and then we kind of have these buildings we've seen all over the map. Besides that, it's a pretty small place. You probably won't want to land here too often. Here's a look at the interior buildings. As you can see, it's pretty much the same design we've seen in many other buildings already across the map. And then that's it. The leaf is very small, not much else to it. There are a few interesting areas to loot nearby. If you do land here, you'll probably have a pretty quiet time and you'll be able to loot up a little bit along the way for the most part. Just consider that you're not going to get great loot, honestly, if you stay here. Next we have Lava Fissure, and this place is really interesting. You have this lower level where you kind of want to go on the zip lines to avoid the lava. And then you have this station that overhangs the lava area. There's a respawn beacon in the middle, 2 separate areas with loot in, and a load of buildings right on the outskirts. You can also go down to a lower level here. There's loot pretty much scattered throughout. It's a really interesting engagement zone. Once again, you kind of have these areas where you're forced to take engagements from a longer distance or sacrifice your position by pushing up through the lava, which is quite interesting. There's also quite a lot of loot around the outskirts and some interesting sight lines for some great fights. We had a really good fight here, as you can see. But like all of these places, there's always scenery all around to be used as cover. For example, we have these rocks right here we can use as cover. Next we have the train yard. Now this place is pretty insignificant. The loot here isn't great, although you can land in these cable cars and get loot. I ended up falling down. I have a feeling there's a lot of good loot in that area. Unfortunately, I struggled to get up there, but you can redeploy in there, or of course use Pathfinder. Just a few shacks, there's not really that much else. Like I said, kind of an insignificant area, honestly, but you may stop here for a few engagements. And then we have some small loot areas leading on to the next zone, which we've already seen before. And then here we have Overhang. Now, Overhang is another one of those small locations that's not really going to draw too much attention, but once again, if you want a quiet drop zone, then this is probably somewhere you're going to want to go. There's kind of one big building and then a few smaller buildings, and the great thing about this place is that it looks over 2 of the most popular areas on the map, so you can always loot up here safely first and then jump into the more hectic areas. Okay, now it's time to look at these secret areas on the map. Now, look closely on the map when you first get into the game, because there'll be a lot of hidden tunnels, and these hidden tunnels, a lot of them have these loot rooms. Lots of extra super high tier loot in these places. To get inside there, you need to get a key from one of the drones that drop the loot balls. So keep an eye out for my video on that. I'll explain exactly how they work, what you need to do to get the keys, how to increase your chances to get a dropped key, and where to find these loot things. Unfortunately, in the gameplay I played, they were locked completely, but they won't be in the full release. And then finally, we have this area that overlooks Skyhook. Now, this doesn't seem that significant, but if you go to the very top, there are loot boxes up there that guarantee snipers. If you want a guaranteed sniper and you want to overlook the city, this is the place to be. It'll also prove to be a very interesting sniper location later in the game, and a really great place to have fights. If you kind of didn't pay attention to the map as you're playing, you probably wouldn't have noticed this spot is even here. I'll show you the top as well, because there's a really nice view. Alright, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching this video. I have so much more content to share with you. I'll go over all of the new features coming. I'll showcase Crypto, all of his skins, show you some of the buffs such as a new Gibby buff that's been put in there, and tons of other stuff leading up to the release tomorrow. So make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the comments. Cheerio!